The sound of concrete mixer engines filled the morning air as I watched the workers pour the final section of my brick and mortar barrier. 3 feet high, 4 feet wide, stretching across my entire driveway entrance. Permanent, immovable, perfect. I could see Corinne storming across her lawn, her face red with rage, cell phone already pressed to her ear. She was calling the police. Again. Just like she had done every time I had tried to protect my own property from her entitled guests. But this time was different. This time I had done my homework. I had consulted lawyers, studied property rights, and planned every single detail. For 3 years, she had treated my private driveway like her personal parking lot. She had ruined family gatherings, blocked my access, and laughed at my attempts to reason with her. Today, Corinne was about to learn that some battles should never be started, because when you push the wrong person too far, they do not just push back, they build walls. 15 years of saving and planning went into finding the perfect lake house. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every careful budget decision led to that moment when I first saw the property listing. 2 acres of pristine lakefront land with a modest but charming house, surrounded by towering pine trees and complete privacy. The house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, maybe 300 yards from the main road. Crystal clear water stretched endlessly beyond my back deck, with mountains rising in the distance like something from a postcard. This was not just a house. This was my family's legacy, our retreat from the chaos of city life. I spent weekends for 2 years renovating every inch of that place. New flooring, updated kitchen, screened porch overlooking the water. My wife and I painted walls together while our kids ran through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the cathedral ceilings. We planted gardens, built a fire pit, and created the perfect sanctuary for family gatherings. The lake community had a homeowners association, but it seemed reasonable enough. Basic rules about maintaining properties, keeping noise down, and respecting neighbors. The monthly dues were manageable, and the community seemed friendly. Most residents were like us, working families who had invested in their little piece of paradise. That was before I met Corinne. She appeared at my door 3 weeks after we moved in, carrying a clipboard and wearing a smile that did not reach her eyes. Corinne lived in the house closest to mine, maybe a quarter-mile down the shoreline. She introduced herself as the HOA compliance coordinator, though I later learned this was a self-appointed title. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, but her gaze was already scanning my property with the intensity of a building inspector. "I wanted to go over some of the community guidelines with you." Corinne was probably in her 50s, with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of confident posture that suggested she was used to being in charge. She asked detailed questions about my renovation plans, my intended use of the property, and how often I expected to have guests. "We like to maintain a certain standard here," she explained, making notes on her clipboard. "Nothing too restrictive, of course. Just want to make sure everyone understands the expectations." I nodded politely, assuming this was normal new neighbor protocol. Corinne seemed pleasant enough, if a bit formal. She complimented my landscaping work and said she looked forward to seeing us at community events. But as she walked back to her car, I noticed something that made me uneasy. She stopped twice to examine different areas of my property, taking photos with her phone. When she thought I was not watching, she measured the distance between my driveway and the property line. I shrugged it off at the time. Maybe she was just thorough. Maybe she genuinely cared about maintaining community standards. I had no way of knowing that Corinne had already identified my property as her next target, or that her friendly visit was actually a reconnaissance mission. All I wanted was to enjoy my lake house in peace, to host family barbecues, teach my kids to fish, and watch sunsets from my deck. Simple pleasures that I had worked so hard to achieve. If only I had known that Corinne had very different plans for my property. The first incident happened on a perfect Saturday morning in late spring. I was driving up to the house with my wife and kids, everyone excited for our first full weekend at the lake. The windows were down, music playing, and we were already planning which hiking trails to explore. Then I saw the cars. 4 vehicles were parked in my driveway, not partially blocking it, not squeezed to one side, completely filling the entire length of my private drive, from the road all the way up to my garage door. A red sedan, 2 SUVs, and a pickup truck, all with out-of-state plates. My stomach dropped. I pulled over at the road entrance, staring at the scene in disbelief. Strangers were walking around my property, some carrying coolers toward the lake. One man was setting up what looked like a fishing station on my dock. "Dad, why are those people at our house?" my daughter asked from the back seat. I had no answer. I parked on the road and walked up the driveway, my family following behind. The strangers looked up as we approached, but none of them seemed concerned or apologetic. They acted like we were the ones who did not belong there. "Excuse me," I called out to the group. "This is private property. You cannot park here." A woman in her 30s emerged from the group, holding a beer and looking annoyed at being interrupted. "We were told we could park here. Some lady said it was community parking." Before I could respond, I heard Corinne's voice behind me. "Oh, there you are." I turned to see her walking up from the direction of her house, wearing a sundress and carrying a wine glass. She looked perfectly relaxed, as if nothing unusual was happening. "Corinne, these people are parked in my driveway," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "They cannot be here." She laughed, a sound that was supposed to be friendly but felt somehow condescending. "Oh, do not be so dramatic. They are just here for a few hours. My book club is having a little lake party, and your driveway is the most convenient parking spot." "It is my driveway," I said, feeling heat rise in my face. "Private property." I know," Corinne said, waving her hand dismissively. "But you are not even here most of the time. What is the harm in letting neighbors use it occasionally? It is all about community spirit." I looked at my wife, who was standing behind me with our kids. Her expression matched my own confusion and anger. This was our first real weekend at the lake, and strangers were literally occupying our property. "Corinne, I need you to ask them to move their cars, now." Her friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something colder underneath. "I think you are being unreasonable. These are good people, and they are not hurting anything. Maybe you should consider being a better neighbor." The strangers were watching this conversation with interest, but none of them offered to move their vehicles. They had clearly been told they had permission to park there, and they were not about to give up their convenient spots. "Fine," I said. "I will call the police and have them towed." Corinne's eyes narrowed. "That seems extreme, but if that is how you want to handle things, go ahead. Just remember that I am very active in the HOA. We have rules about neighborly cooperation and community standards." There was a threat in her voice, subtle but unmistakable. I realized that this was not just about parking. This was about power. Corinne was testing me, seeing how far she could push before I would fight back. I spent the next hour on the phone with the sheriff's department, explaining the situation. By the time a deputy arrived, Corinne had convinced her book club members to move their cars, but not before making it clear that they were the victims of my unreasonable behavior. The deputy was polite but firm. "Sir, this is definitely your property, and you have the right to control who parks here. But next time, maybe try to work it out with your neighbors first." Karen smiled sweetly as the deputy left. "I hope we can find a better way to handle these situations in the future," she said. "I would hate for there to be any unpleasantness in our lovely community." That night, as I sat on my deck watching the sunset, I realized that my peaceful lake house had become a battleground, and Karen had just fired the first shot. Karen's parking invasions became a regular occurrence, each one more brazen than the last. What started as a book club gathering escalated into birthday parties, family reunions, and what appeared to be random social events. My driveway had become the unofficial parking lot for Karen's social calendar. I installed 3 metal signs along my driveway: "Private property, no parking vehicles will be TOWED." They were professional looking, clearly visible, and completely ignored. Karen's guests would park right next to them, sometimes using the sign posts to tie balloons or decorations. The morning I found someone had spray-painted "community parking" over one of my signs, I knew the situation had moved beyond simple neighbor disputes. This was deliberate harassment. But Karen was clever. She never parked in my driveway herself. She never organized events on my property. She simply told her guests they could park there, then acted surprised when conflicts arose. If confronted, she would express sympathy for the misunderstanding while doing nothing to prevent it from happening again. The HOA letters started arriving in my mailbox 3 weeks after the first incident. Official-looking documents on HOA letterhead detailing various violations of community standards. My lawn was allegedly too long. My dock needed repainting. My outdoor lighting was too bright. None of these complaints were legitimate. My property was immaculate, better maintained than most in the community. But each letter required a response, demanded photos for documentation, and threatened fines if violations were not corrected within 10 days. I would spend hours photographing my property, writing detailed responses, and researching HOA bylaws to prove my compliance. Then another letter would arrive, citing different violations or claiming my previous response was inadequate. Karen had weaponized the HOA system against me. The monthly community meetings became public tribunals where Karen held court. She would arrive early, sit in the front row, and spend the entire meeting questioning my commitment to community standards. She never made direct accusations, but her comments were designed to plant seeds of doubt. "I am just concerned about maintaining our property values," she would say, shaking her head sadly. "When some residents do not seem to understand the importance of neighborly cooperation, it affects all of us." Other residents began looking at me differently. Some avoided eye contact when we passed on the road. Others asked pointed questions about my parking situation and whether I was working things out with Karen. She was systematically destroying my reputation in the community, painting me as the difficult neighbor who would not compromise. Meanwhile, her guests continued to park in my driveway every weekend, turning my family retreats into stressful confrontations. My wife started dreading our lake house visits. "Maybe we should just sell," she suggested after a particularly frustrating weekend when we had to park on the road and carry our groceries a quarter mile because Karen's garden party had claimed our driveway. "We cannot sell," I said. "This is our home, our investment, our kids' future." But privately, I was beginning to doubt myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I really that bad of a neighbor? Corinne's constant psychological pressure was working, making me question my own judgment. The breaking point came during my son's birthday party. We had planned a small celebration with extended family, including my elderly parents who had difficulty walking long distances. When we arrived, Corinne's monthly bunco group had turned my driveway into their parking lot. My father, who was recovering from hip surgery, had to walk nearly 300 yards from the road to the house. He was exhausted and in pain by the time he reached the front door. My mother was close to tears, asking why we had to park so far away. "This is ridiculous," my wife said, watching her in-laws struggle up the driveway. "Something has to change." I approached Corinne, who was holding court on her deck with a group of women, all of them watching my family struggle with apparent amusement. "Corinne, my elderly parents cannot walk that far. Please ask your guests to move their cars." She sipped her wine and smiled. "Oh, I am sorry to hear about your father, but my ladies are right in the middle of their game. Maybe your parents could park closer to the road next time." That night, after my parents had gone home early due to exhaustion, I sat in my study researching property law. There had to be a legal solution to this problem. There had to be a way to protect my property rights without being painted as the villain. I was about to discover that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to become something they never expected, someone who fights back. The anniversary celebration was supposed to be perfect. My parents had been married for 50 years, and we had planned a special weekend at the lake house to commemorate their golden anniversary. Extended family was coming from 3 states. I had reserved the community clubhouse for Saturday evening, ordered a custom cake, and arranged for professional photos by the lake. My parents had been talking about this celebration for months. They had never owned a lake house, never had a place like this to gather the family. This weekend was their chance to see what their son had built, to celebrate in the sanctuary I had created for moments exactly like this. Friday afternoon, I arrived early to set up decorations and prepare the guest rooms. The weather was perfect, warm sunshine with a gentle breeze off the lake. Everything was exactly as I had imagined it would be. Then I saw the cars. Not just 4 or 5 vehicles this time. Corinne had orchestrated the largest parking invasion yet. 8 cars filled my driveway, parked bumper to bumper from the road to my garage. More vehicles were parked on the grass beside my driveway, creating deep ruts in the lawn I had spent months perfecting. A banner stretched between 2 trees near my front door. CONGRATULATIONS, MARTHA and Bill, 30 years. This was not just another social gathering. Corinne was hosting her own anniversary party, and she had claimed my property as her venue. I walked through the crowd of strangers on my own land, feeling like an intruder in my own home. A DJ was setting up speakers near my dock. Tables and chairs were arranged on my deck. Someone had moved my outdoor furniture to make room for a buffet table. I found Corinne directing traffic near my front door, wearing a party dress and acting like the hostess of her own event. "Corinne, what is this? You cannot host a party on my property." She turned to me with that same condescending smile. "Oh, do not be so selfish. Martha and Bill are lovely people, and they deserve a nice celebration. Your driveway is the perfect parking area. My family is arriving in 2 hours for my parents' anniversary party. These cars have to move. Now." Corinne's expression hardened. "I am sorry, but my event was planned first. Maybe you should have coordinated with me before scheduling your little family gathering." "This is my property. I do not need to coordinate anything with you." Well, that attitude is exactly why you have so many problems in this community, Karen said, raising her voice so others could hear. Maybe if you learn to share and cooperate, we could all get along better. The crowd was watching our confrontation with interest. Some were filming with their phones. I realized that Karen had not just stolen my property for her event. She had set up a public spectacle to humiliate me. I called the sheriff's department, but was told they could not respond for 2 hours due to a traffic accident on the main highway. By the time they arrived, Karen's party would be over and my family celebration would be ruined. My parents arrived at 4 o'clock, driving slowly up the road in their old sedan. I watched from my window as my father, confused and tired, parked nearly a quarter-mile away. My mother got out of the car, looked at the crowd of strangers celebrating on our property, and started crying. I ran down the driveway to meet them, my heart breaking as I saw the disappointment in their eyes. "Son, what is happening?" my father asked. "Why are all these people here?" I had no answer that would make sense. How could I explain that our neighbor had stolen our celebration, turned our dream into a nightmare, and made us unwelcome on our own property? My mother was too upset to walk the long distance to the house. She sat in the car, crying quietly, while my father stood beside her looking lost and confused. Family members started arriving, parking along the road, carrying gifts and flowers through the crowd of strangers. My uncle approached me with a bewildered expression. "Are we at the wrong house? There seems to be another party going on here." Karen watched this scene unfold from my deck, sipping champagne and laughing with her guests. She had not just ruined my celebration, she had turned it into entertainment for her own party. That night, after my family had gone home disappointed and confused, I sat alone on my deck, surrounded by the debris from Karen's party. Empty bottles, paper plates, and cigarette butts littered my property. Someone had left a smoldering cigar on my deck railing, burning a permanent mark into the wood. I had spent 15 years saving for this house, 2 years renovating it, and 3 years trying to enjoy it peacefully. Karen had destroyed all of that in one afternoon. As I cleaned up the mess from her party, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being diplomatic. I was done trying to reason with someone who had no respect for property rights or human decency. Karen had just pushed the wrong person too far, and she was about to learn that some people, when cornered, do not retreat. They build walls. The Monday morning after my parents' ruined anniversary, I sat in my home office with a cup of coffee and a legal pad. No more emotional reactions. No more attempting to reason with unreasonable people. This was going to be handled strategically, legally, and permanently. I started with property law research, diving deep into easement rights, trespassing statutes, and homeowner protections. Hours of reading legal documents and case studies revealed a simple truth that Karen had apparently never considered. Property owners have absolute right to control access to their land. The consultation with Attorney Mitchell confirmed everything I had learned. A sharp-dressed man in his 60s, he listened to my story with the expression of someone who had heard similar tales many times before. "Mr. Johnson, your situation is unfortunately common, but legally straightforward," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You have the absolute right to prevent unauthorized parking on your property. Installing barriers at your property line is not only legal, it is your right as a landowner." He pulled out a folder of documents. HOA covenants cannot override property rights. Your neighbor has no legal standing to demand access to your driveway, and her complaints about your barriers would be frivolous. What kind of barriers are we talking about? I asked. Anything from simple posts to permanent structures. The key is ensuring they are on your property and do not obstruct public right-of-way. A brick and mortar barrier at your property line would be completely legal and extremely effective. I left his office with a detailed plan and renewed confidence. Karen had been operating under the assumption that I would never fight back effectively. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The next step was research and planning. I spent a week studying construction methods, measuring my property line and selecting materials. This was not going to be a temporary solution or a half measure. This was going to be permanent, professional, and absolutely unbreachable. I chose red brick with concrete mortar, 3 feet high and 4 feet wide. The barrier would stretch across my entire driveway entrance, with a small gap that could be closed with a removable section when I needed access. It would be attractive, well-built, and completely impassable to vehicles. The construction crew arrived on a Thursday morning, led by a foreman named Tony, who had built similar barriers for other property owners dealing with parking disputes. "You would be surprised how common this is," Tony said, surveying my driveway. "People think they can just park wherever they want. A good solid barrier usually solves the problem permanently." I took the day off work to supervise the construction, partly to ensure it was done properly, and partly because I wanted to be there when Karen discovered what was happening. The concrete mixer arrived first, followed by a truck full of bricks. The crew worked efficiently, laying foundation concrete and beginning the first rows of bricks. By noon, the barrier was 2 feet high and clearly visible from the road. That was when Karen appeared. I was standing near the construction site when I saw her marching across her lawn, her face flushed with anger and disbelief. She was carrying her ever-present clipboard and had her phone pressed to her ear. "Stop this immediately," she shouted at the construction crew. "This is illegal. You cannot build that." Tony looked up from his work, completely unfazed. "Ma'am, we have all the proper permits. This is private property, and the owner has the right to control access." Karen turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You cannot do this. People need to park here. This is community property." "No, Karen," I said calmly. "This is my property, and I am exercising my legal right to control access to it. The HOA will never allow this. I am calling an emergency meeting. This violates every community standard we have." I pulled out a copy of the legal opinion Attorney Mitchell had provided. According to property law and HOA bylaws, this is completely legal. I am not blocking public access or violating any legitimate community standards. Karen snatched the document from my hands, scanning it quickly. I watched her face change as she realized that her usual tactics would not work here. I had done my homework. I had legal backing. I had outmaneuvered her. "This is not over," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I will find a way to stop this." But as she stormed back toward her house, I could see defeat in her posture. For the first time in our conflict, Karen was the one who was powerless. By evening, the barrier was complete. 3 feet of solid brick and mortar, stretching across my driveway entrance like a fortress wall. It was beautiful, professional, and absolutely impenetrable to vehicles. I stood beside my new barrier as the sun set over the lake, feeling a satisfaction I had not experienced in years. My property was finally secure. My family could visit without fear of confrontation. Karen's parking invasions were finished forever. The war was far from over, but the battlefield had just shifted dramatically in my favor. Karen's reaction to my barrier was swift and predictable. Less than 12 hours after construction was complete, I received a certified letter from the HOA demanding immediate removal of my illegal obstruction. The letter was signed by Karen in her capacity as Community Standards Coordinator. But I was prepared. Attorney Mitchell had drafted a response that cited relevant property law and included copies of the construction permits. Within 24 hours, the HOA received a detailed legal explanation of why my barrier was completely legitimate. Karen's next move was calling the police. Saturday morning, I was enjoying coffee on my deck when I saw the sheriff's cruiser pull up to my barrier. Deputy Martinez stepped out, examined the structure, and walked up to my house. "Sir, I received a complaint about an illegal obstruction of traffic. Are you the property owner?" "Yes, I am. That is my driveway, and this is my property line." I showed him the survey documents and construction permits. Deputy Martinez studied the paperwork, then walked back to examine the barrier more closely. "Ma'am," he called to Karen, who was hovering nearby, "this appears to be legal. The barrier is on his property, and he has the right to control access." Karen's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "But people have been parking there for months. It is practically a public easement." "No, ma'am, that is not how easements work. Unauthorized parking does not create legal rights. The property owner can block access whenever he chooses." I watched Karen's face crumble as she realized that law enforcement was not going to help her. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced by desperation and barely controlled panic. "This is harassment," she screamed. "He is targeting me specifically. This is retaliation." Deputy Martinez looked at me with sympathy. "Sir, have you been having ongoing disputes with your neighbor?" "She has been allowing people to park in my driveway without permission for months. I asked her to stop many times. This barrier is my legal solution to protect my property rights." The deputy nodded. "Ma'am, I suggest you work this out through proper channels, but this gentleman has the right to control access to his property." After the deputy left, Karen's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started patrolling the road near my house, taking photos of my property and measuring distances. She filed additional HOA complaints about everything from my mailbox placement to the color of my roof shingles. The emergency HOA meeting Karen called for the following Tuesday was her final stand. She had spent the week rallying supporters, spreading rumors, and preparing what she clearly expected to be my public humiliation. But something had changed in the community. Several neighbors approached me before the meeting expressing support for my position. "Karen has been pushing people around for years," one neighbor said. "Maybe it is time someone stood up to her." The meeting was held in the community center, with about 30 residents attending. Karen sat in the front row, surrounded by her usual supporters, but the energy in the room felt different. When the meeting began, Karen immediately demanded the floor. "We are here to discuss the illegal barrier that Mr. Johnson has erected in clear violation of community standards and neighborly cooperation." I stood to respond, but Karen cut me off. "This is about more than parking. This is about selfishness, about one person putting their interests above the community good." Her voice was rising, becoming more shrill and desperate. "Mr. Johnson has shown complete disregard for community spirit. He has been uncooperative, hostile, and antisocial since the day he moved here." Several residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen's accusations were becoming increasingly personal and vindictive. "I demand that the HOA order immediate removal of this barrier, and impose fines for Mr. Johnson's violations of community standards. When I finally had a chance to speak, I simply presented the legal facts: property rights, construction permits, and attorney opinions. No emotional appeals, no personal attacks, just documentation. The room was quiet when I finished. Then Mrs. Henderson, an elderly resident who had lived in the community for 20 years, stood up. "Corinne, I think you have gone too far this time. This man has the right to control his own property. Maybe you should have asked permission before telling people they could park there." Other residents began speaking up, expressing similar sentiments. The tide had turned. Corinne's support was crumbling before her eyes. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the community was no longer willing to enable Corinne's behavior. Her reign of manipulation and intimidation was finally over. The formal HOA sanctions against Corinne came 2 weeks after the disastrous community meeting. An official letter outlined multiple violations of her duties as Community Standards Coordinator, including harassment of residents, filing false complaints, and misuse of HOA resources for personal vendettas. Corinne was stripped of all volunteer positions and barred from holding HOA offices for 3 years. The letter, signed by the HOA president and board members, made it clear that her behavior had become a liability to the community. But the real consequences were just beginning. Attorney Mitchell called me on a Thursday morning with news that made my week. "Mr. Johnson, I have been contacted by the district attorney's office. They are investigating Corinne's false police reports and fraudulent HOA complaints. Apparently, you are not her only victim." It turned out that Corinne had been operating similar harassment campaigns against other residents for years. A retired teacher had been targeted for having too many bird feeders. A young couple had been harassed for their choice of outdoor furniture. Corinne had weaponized the HOA system against anyone who refused to submit to her authority. The DA is considering charges of harassment, filing false reports, and misuse of community resources, Attorney Mitchell explained. Her pattern of behavior suggests this was systematic rather than isolated incidents. The legal investigation revealed the full extent of Corinne's abuse. Filing cabinet full of fabricated complaints, thousands of photos taken of neighbors' properties without permission, and detailed records of her surveillance activities. She had been running a neighborhood surveillance state, with herself as the supreme authority. 3 months after I built my barrier, Corinne's house went up for sale. The "for sale" sign appeared overnight, with no advance notice to the community. Within a week, she was gone, leaving behind only the memory of 3 years of harassment and manipulation. The day I saw the moving truck in her driveway, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that my family's peace had been restored, but sadness that it had taken so long for the community to recognize what Corinne really was. My neighbors began approaching me with apologies and expressions of support. Mrs. Henderson brought homemade cookies and admitted she had been afraid to speak up against Corinne earlier. The couple with the bird feeders thanked me for showing them how to fight back against harassment. "You did what the rest of us were too scared to do," said Tom, a neighbor who lived 3 houses down. "Corinne had everyone walking on eggshells, afraid of being her next target." The community atmosphere transformed completely. HOA meetings became collaborative discussions rather than Corinne's personal tribunals. Residents began helping each other with projects instead of filing complaints. The fear that had dominated our neighborhood for years was finally gone. My lake house became what I had always dreamed it would be. Family gatherings resumed without stress or confrontation. My parents returned for a proper anniversary celebration, this time with the entire family able to park in my driveway and enjoy the property as intended. My children learned to fish from my dock, just as I had imagined. My wife started planning regular family reunions, confident that our sanctuary would remain peaceful. The screened porch became our favorite gathering spot, where we could watch sunsets over the lake without fear of conflict. The brick barrier remains in place, now covered with climbing roses that bloom spectacularly each spring. It has become a symbol not just of property rights, but of the importance of standing up to bullies who believe they can intimidate others into submission. Looking back, I realized that Corinne's harassment was never really about parking spaces or community standards. It was about power and control. She had identified me as someone who might challenge her authority, and she had tried to destroy my reputation and peace of mind before I could become a threat to her system. If you are facing a similar situation, remember this. Bullies rely on your unwillingness to fight back. They count on your desire to avoid conflict, your hope that things will get better if you just try harder to get along. But sometimes, the only way to stop a bully is to show them that you are not afraid to defend yourself. Know your rights, get legal advice, document everything, and do not be afraid to build walls when walls are necessary. Sometimes the best neighbors are the ones who respect boundaries. My lake house is finally the peaceful sanctuary it was meant to be. And Corinne learned that when you push the wrong person too far, they do not just push back, they build something permanent.